All right. So, have you ever had a moment where you realize something about yourself? And you're like, oh, that's why I do this. Or, oh, like, this is why I may have felt this way in this situation because of X, Y, and Z type of a thing. And I think if we do any amount of reflection, whether frequent or infrequent, we can have these moments of realization about ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I love these moments. I love being like, oh, I understand myself so much better now because I just figured this thing out. And I find that it's in those moments and those aha moments that I feel like I can live in a more free place because of that understanding. And I can live more into who I am and how God created me to be. So if you are new here at all, if you haven't been here in the last few weeks, we are in a series called It's All About You, which is a series that we are kind of unpacking to do some self-discovery. But it's self-discovery in the context of community. So we're doing this together. Because it's discovering how God has made us, and he calls us each a masterpiece. And if any of you have gone to an art gallery, I last about 4 seconds in an art gallery. Some people can last 4 days. I'm 4 seconds. But if you do go in an art gallery, if you look at the art, if you kind of just walk by and you see the piece of art, you kind of get like a general overview of what's going on. But if you sit in front of that piece of art for a while, you start to realize that there are these other things in that piece of art that you uncover, and you're like, oh, I didn't see that 5 minutes ago. Like, that kind of ties the whole thing together. Or, oh, I didn't realize that in the very top right corner. That helps bring the story together a little bit more. So it's the same kind of thing as we discover ourselves. If we just kind of glance by who we are and what we do, we'll get a general idea of who we are. But if we actually take time to reflect and to discover and understand ourselves, we can get these glimpses of these other parts of our own masterpiece that God created us to be. Because there are parts of our masterpiece and parts of who we are that they're all there. The masterpiece is a masterpiece, but they're hidden. And so these are the behaviors and the things that we do that are kind of in our unconscious mind. It's the things that can drive us forward without us actually knowing what it's doing. And sometimes these unconscious ways of being and behaving and acting can cause us to go down roads we don't really want to go down, can lead us to be like, why did I do that? Why did I make that decision? And it's because there are these ways of being that we haven't become aware of yet. But when we take time to do some reflection and some discovery of what we do and why we do them, all of a sudden those unconscious behaviors come to the conscious level. And we're like, oh, this is this. And you can put a label on it. And that label you can then bring to God and be like, God, I just noticed that I tend to lean towards doing this, whether positive or negative. You can put a label on it, bring it to God, and then be like, okay, in this particular moment, this thing is causing me to go down a road that I don't really want to go down. Can you come and do a transformative work? Because God's power is so much bigger than any power a behavior can have over us when it's in the unconscious level. So through this journey that we're going to be on together for the next couple months, I would be lying to you if I said this wasn't going to be difficult. The journey of self-discovery, if we actually take any sort of amount of time to be honest with ourselves, can be quite difficult. So I've been using this tool that we are using called the Enneagram for over a year now, and sometimes it has felt like I'm in a boxing ring with myself, and all of a sudden myself punches me in the gut. And I'm like, oh, interesting. You may experience the same thing, and that is good. It's a really good thing, and we're on this journey together. It's also kind of like training for a marathon. So if anyone's done any amount of running, the number of times that I've started and stopped running is numerous because I can't get past the first 3 weeks. Because when you first go out running, you're like, yeah, I feel good. And then 2 minutes in, you're like, what am I doing? And your legs are screaming at you, and you're like, stop, go back. But if you do it again and again and again and again, typically by like week 3, you're running and you're not even thinking about it because you've trained yourself into this mode of running and being in your mind is more used to it. So it's the same kind of thing with this journey. The more you do it, the easier it becomes to be honest with yourself and to be honest with others so that you can live in the best version of yourself possible. So there's this quote, and I have no idea if this works. It does. by someone named Andreas Eckert, and it says, "Self-knowledge is tied with inner work, which is both demanding and painful. Change occurs amid birth pangs. It takes courage to walk such a path. Many avoid the path of self-knowledge because they are afraid of being swallowed up in their own abysses. But Christians have confidence that Christ has lived through all the abysses of human life and that he goes with us when we dare to engage in such confrontation with ourselves." So this idea of confrontation is actually kind of ironic because the number that we're going to go through today is the ultimate avoider of confrontation. So if you resonate with the number today, you might be wrestling already inside yourself. But I want to encourage us to not be afraid of that process because we are in it together. Yes, this is a journey of discovering your own self and how God has created you personally, hence why it's called It's All About You, but it is a context of community, and that's why I love the wall out there, because it's these individual faces, but we're all together on the wall, and we want to do the best that we can to create a safe place here so we can be on that journey together. So we are going through this process it's the tool that's called the Enneagram, and there's 9 different types. And some of you, I know you still can't get over the word types. We've done this for 3 weeks, saying the word types, because you think that we're trying to put you in a box. If anyone tells you you're getting put in a box, I will personally confront them and be like, we're not putting you in a box. The tool or the goal of this tool is to simply give language to how you might be experiencing yourself and why you might be experiencing the world the way that you do. So it's simply a tool. We don't want to ever use the behaviors or the motivations as an excuse to do something. We want to use it as an encouragement, and we want to use it as a tool of freedom and a tool of transformation and a language so that we can together have a conversation about it. So there are these 3 triads. This is just a brief recap. We have the anger, the shame, and the fear triad. So the 2s, 3s, and 4s are more likely to experience shame and live out of that shame. The 5s, 6, and 7s experience fear and are driven by fear a little bit more than the others. And the 8, 9s, and 1s are more anger-driven. How these emotions play out for each number is very different, which you'll probably discover the more we get into this. So last week, Shane went through the 8s, which is one of the numbers in the anger triad. They're very justice-driven. They're very external, kind of in their anger. But we need 8s in the world because they drive things forward and make things happen. So as order would have it, we are going to go to the 9s because 9 comes after 8. But as order would not have it, we are going to unpack the peacekeepers, which is the complete opposite of the challengers. So God's very creative in making a variety of personality types. To give you a sense of the 9s, I tried to call someone up in the Bible and be like, hey, are you a 9? Because you never want to assume someone's number. But, this person is from way back in the first book of the Bible called Genesis, so they're no longer with us. So I made some assumptions. And to walk you through what this person may have been experiencing as a potential 9, I would like to become this person and walk you through it as a narrative style and see if I can get you in the mind of a 9 a little bit. And if as I'm going through the story, if you're relating to some of the things that I'm saying and you're maybe feeling it a little bit inside, you might be a 9, potentially. Don't jump to any conclusions right away because it is a journey, but you can kind of just hold it there and be like, I was relating with some of those things. And then once we go through the story, I'll unpack it a little bit more. So are we ready for this? All right. My name is Abraham, and I'd like to share my story with you if that's okay. Because I feel like if I share this story with you, we'll connect on a personal level. Is that good? Can I connect with you a bit more? Awesome. So even though you know me as Abraham, I'm formally known as Abram. It's the name that my father Terah gave me. I have 2 brothers, Nahor and Haran, even though we tragically lost Haran. I married a beautiful woman, Sarai, and together we had hopes and dreams of starting a family and raising our own children. But as God would have it, we were unable to conceive for many, many, many years. As a family, we lived in Ur of the Chaldeans for many years, but one day my father led Sarai, myself, and Lot, my nephew, to the land of Canaan. We didn't actually make it, but rather settled in Haran, where eventually we lost my father, leaving Sarai and I with Lot. When I was 75 years of age, I received a call from the Lord. He said, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation." Now, the idea of being a great nation wasn't necessarily the appeal for me. I'm content to just stay behind the scenes, live a simple life. No spotlight is necessary, just keep me in the back. Yet my spiritual connection is strong. Some would even call it simple. It always has. And mixed with that connection, I also didn't want to risk disappointing God by disobeying a command. But even though God said not to bring my father's family, I could still bring Lot, right? I didn't want to have to deal with an outburst from Lot or the potential separation of the relationship I had with him, because that would just be far too much to handle. God would understand, right? So I gathered Sarai and Lot, and together we journeyed toward Canaan. And when we arrived, I built an altar in each corner of the land that the Lord was giving me. The altar gave me a physical place to worship the divine. His presence in my life was really all I craved, because his peace pressed into me, and it kept me well. But soon, a famine would hit the land. The thought of my family going through a famine was more than my heart could bear. I kept visualizing their hunger pains and sorrow and fatigue. So instead of trusting God to provide, we went to Egypt to live as foreigners. It was a long journey, and as we neared the border to enter Egypt, I inwardly began to panic. Up until this point, I had kept that connection with God, but now I was entering into a territory where the fear of losing the woman I loved was overriding that faith. I knew she was beautiful, and I knew that there was a risk of myself being executed so she could be taken as a prized possession. I felt the stability inside me start to wobble and the anxiety rise up in my chest. To protect her, to protect me, I knew I had to do something. What could I do to keep the palace officials happy, and what could I do to keep Sarah and I happy so there didn't have to be any conflict? Right, what would make the palace officials happy? I figured out I would just tell them she wasn't my wife, and I would just say she's my sister. There was no blood that needed to be shed with an aggressive or honest response. We'll just stay in the passive-aggressive and call it a harmonious win. And sure enough, it was a win. We were treated incredibly well because of her beauty. Until we weren't. My ploy didn't hold forever, and Pharaoh drove us out of Egypt in a rage. And though this rebuke came from a man named Pharaoh, I felt like it was from God. Why didn't I trust him to meet our needs in Canaan during the famine? Instead, I simply followed my anxieties and need for everyone to be a state of peace, and it drove us in a bad place. So because we were told to leave, Sarai, Lot, and I journeyed forward again, but not really forward, we just went back to the place we came from. Because I broke that connection with God, we literally walked in a circle, wasting time in Egypt, when we should have just stayed and pushed through those moments of discomfort. My heart whirled with anxiety. I was angry with myself for behaving so poorly, and I was angry that I was causing rifts in relationships. I felt completely unstable. So to help, I went right back to the first altar I built to worship. I needed to restore what I had foolishly broken. To add to the instability, it became clear that Lot and I couldn't live on the same land. With the magnitude of my wealth and Lot's wealth, there were too many disputes happening. I finally told Lot we needed to divide the land and restore the peace. Even though all the land had been promised to me, I knew I had to extend generosity to bring healing to the situation. Now, without wanting to even make a decision that could cause more conflict, I just told Lot to choose. The right or the left, I said. I'd happily be satisfied with the other option as long as I knew that God and I were good and that Lot and I could go forward in a healthy manner. Even when the land was divided, in God's goodness, he still told me he was giving me all the land, as far as north is south and east is west, and that my descendants would be many. In sheer gratitude and relief that God's forgiveness was granted to my foolish mistake, I built an altar and worshiped. Now, let's fast forward some time. By now, you should know how much that I really value personal connection. And I felt like God really honored that with me. For example, this one time, he intimately talked with me through a vision. It was so real and so significant. He reminded me that he had chosen me to bear a son, and my descendants would be as numerous as the stars. I was still confused as to how, especially since Sarai and I were ripe in age, but my faith felt stronger than that confusion. God established a covenant, firmly establishing his promise with me, and I held tightly to that. Until I didn't. Later on, my wife Sarai started to nag me. Maybe she was getting anxious or perhaps impatient about bearing a son, knowing that she was in her old age. But her nagging me was getting stronger and more frequent. I felt like our relationship was on the line, and I hated having her angry with me. I hate when anyone's angry with me, but especially her. I started to feel the instability inside my gut. I was wobbling, stressed, and unsure. I hated being forced to take sides. Do I just hold to God's vision and clarity, or my wife's persistence? I hated the anger that started to bubble up inside me, so I just pushed it to the side to pretend it wasn't even there. I honestly trusted God, but Sarai was pushing a timeline I felt like I couldn't keep up with. I was losing any grip I had on the situation, and all inner peace had completely disappeared. So when Sarai told me to take Hagar, her Egyptian servant, to bear a son, I didn't feel like I had much of a choice. I was losing out in all my relationships at this point, and I couldn't make a clear, rational decision. I most definitely couldn't say no to Sarai, because that would be the end of me. So I complied to keep us afloat. Let me say, my avoidance of saying no to Sarai caused more harm than good. Eventually, Hagar and Sarai were in conflict all the time, and I couldn't bear to be around it. The anger continued to bubble, not that I really knew it at the time. It felt like a sin to be angry, and I should just be able to control those outrageous emotions and maintain my calm, cool, collected demeanor. But then Sarai blamed me for it all, so she may as well have put a sword in my heart and twisted it. Sarai said, "She's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit." How could I do anything? Sarai was angry, Hagar was angry. Do I dare admit that I was angry? Maybe if I just shooed Hagar away, she could start a new life, and Sarai would go back to normal. Could everyone win with that? Before I could even do anything about it, Hagar just ran away. Barely got out of dealing with that. Now, hopefully, peace and harmony could be restored. When I turned 99 years old, God came to me again and confirmed the covenant he promised. I was to be the father of many nations. Sarai would become pregnant this year. I was to circumcise all my descendants, including Ishmael, my son with Hagar. And God then changed my name to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. I am Abraham. Later on, as I was near the oak tree, some men approached me. I ran out to meet them and to welcome them in. I urged them to stay a while, to share in a meal and enjoy a visit. And as we enjoyed a meal together, one of the men said that by next year, Sarah will have given birth to a son. Now was the time for God's promise to come to fruition. When our visit was done, I walked the men out a distance to see them off. But then the Lord pointed out Sodom to me. He said he was going to destroy it. Destruction? Harm on the people? All I could hear were desperate pleas for help, screams of pain ringing through the land, and peace completely destroyed. Why would the Lord want to cause such harm? Where was his characteristic of peace? Somewhere in me I found the courage to speak to God. And maybe the courage came from a state of desperation, or maybe I was simply more courageous than I thought. Lord, I said, suppose you find 50 righteous people living there in the city. Will you still sweep it away and not spare it for their sakes? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous along with the wicked. Amazingly, the Lord agreed to not destroy the city if he found 50 righteous people. If this step of boldness worked, maybe I could try it again. What about 45 righteous people, Lord? He agreed. How far? How far could I push this without God getting angry with me? I was getting nervous, but the confidence outweighed. What about 35 righteous people? 30? 20? 10? I was sweating buckets by this point because I was walking on ground with God that I wasn't really used to. How dare I question him? But how dare I know that destruction would come if I couldn't intercede with them with the hope of restoring peace and stability. And even though Sodom was destroyed, God saved my nephew Lot and his family, and for that I was thankful. Soon, Sarah became pregnant. God kept his promise. Despite my mistakes, his love was greater, and his faithfulness endured. Our son Isaac was brought into the world, and it was truly the most joyous day. To be a father was an incredible honor, and I just hoped and prayed I could raise him well and that he would know God intimately. So, here we have a man named Abraham. God established a covenant with Abraham, and this covenant was with the goal of restoring this relationship with God and humanity. It was a covenant of grace, and it was a covenant of peace. It's really no wonder that God didn't choose an 8 to bring out this covenant, because, 8s are incredible people and can drive things forward. If you were here last week, they just go. But they really aren't the most peaceful of people, probably the last word to describe an 8. And so God, wanting to restore this peace between him and humanity, decided to use a peacemaker. And who better to use than a peacemaker? Because when sin came into the world in the very beginning, it caused this separation. Caused a separation from God. It caused a separation between us as people because of that, these choices that we make, and that breaks God's heart. He wants us to be in right relationship with him and with each other. He designed us to be his image bearers, and yet we fall short of that every day. And so that initial peace, which was created in the world, has turned into things like pain and hatred and anger. Causes a bit of an imbalance in our relationships and a separation. So who better than a man like Abraham, a peacemaker, to bring his peace? So 9s reflect God's peace in a brilliant and a profound way. More than any other number on the wheel, they reflect God's peace. Their core desire is to have peace themselves and to be stable. And it's not only peace and stability in the external world, but it's also in their inner world. They fear conflict and tension, and they really just avoid it at all costs. Don't need conflict, just keep it away. And we saw this with Abraham when he couldn't stand the conflict between Sarai and Hagar, when he had conflict with Lot, the potential conflict with the palace officials in Egypt. He just tried to run from it and be like, get the conflict away. Because in those places, he felt very uncomfortable and he felt very vulnerable. And he went to great lengths to restore the peace, but sometimes his great lengths was simply just avoidance. So the 9s struggle, their kind of shadow side is that they avoid things a lot. And this avoidance is definitely, it can be caused by multiple things. So they can avoid making decisions because they don't want to be the one to blame if something goes wrong. Just like when Abraham told Lot to choose, he didn't want to make that decision. They can avoid engaging with conflict, especially when conflict is healthy and necessary in certain moments. And they can avoid doing the hard work of understanding themselves, because to understand yourselves means you have to disrupt the peace that might be in there already. So with all this avoiding, the question really becomes, is it really true peace when everything is just repressed? So 9s, one of their amazing qualities is that they're willing to forego their own needs, wants, and desires for the sake of the other, which in and of itself is a really positive thing. It's very scriptural. God tells us to put others before ourselves, and 9s do that brilliantly. But any sort of characteristic or quality taken to either extreme can become a negative. And so that's where 9s can also downfall, is they can put others before themselves so much that they kind of forget themselves. They are incredibly empathetic people, and this is part of how they can kind of get rid of themselves and just go to the other, is because they can walk in other people's shoes like no other. They are the best at doing that. They're often called the crown of the Enneagram, And this is not only because their number's on top of the circle, which is very ironic because nines don't want recognition or power at all, but it's because they can understand the characteristics of everybody else. So to give you a glimpse, even though we haven't gone through all the numbers yet, nines can have, the strength of the eights, the sense of fun and adventure of sevens, the dutifulness of sixes, the intellectualism of fives, creativity of fours, the focus of threes, generosity of twos, the idealisms of ones. So they can understand all of this and walk in the shoes of all of those things, but they don't know themselves. They can lose themselves in the identity of everybody else and forget who they are. Now, oftentimes, nines quietly have their own dreams kind of back here, because they do have dreams, but they don't really let other people know that because they don't want to risk conflicting with somebody else. And so you could see that with Abraham. So when Sarai nagged him to have a child with Hagar, he didn't really have a sense of who he was and what his role was to play in that. He kind of forgot himself as Abraham, but also he forgot who he was as a child of God. So instead, he just went along with Sarai. But when a nine becomes aware of their own self and their own identity, when they get in touch with who they are in God as well, they come to believe that they matter. And when that happens, they no longer let others highly influence their decisions. They know that their voice matters. They know that they have gifts and talents to offer the world. And part of that gift is the fact that they can understand everybody else. They can understand all points of view and all perspectives. So when they come to you and they listen, they're very great listeners, and you share things with them, they can understand where you're coming from, and then they can emotionally join the journey with people. They don't just drive by people or through people, they just sit with people, and that is a gift. And while they are with people, and they listen, and they hear, and they encourage, they can calmly and genuinely help others come to a place of peace, because that is their gift. They are the peace bringers to people. So if you think that you're a nine in this room, if you're relating with anything I'm saying or any of the things that Abraham was experiencing, any of the points, you don't have to declare it today, but if you think maybe this could be you, I want to give you 4 things. Just want to chat with you for just a minute if you think you're a 9. There we go. So first things first for the 9s in this room. Practice speaking up for yourself. You can do it. And it's easier than you think. People want to hear what your dreams are. They want to hear what your opinion is. They want to hear what you think because you have so much to offer. And we also saw how it didn't quite work out for Abraham when he didn't speak up. So you need to learn to trust yourself. And part of that trusting and knowing what you want to speak up about is to know and recognize your own feelings and your own thoughts and your own dreams and honestly admitting it to yourself and then admitting it to others. Second, move from a place of people-pleasing to being confident in the peace that comes from God. Remember that your identity is found in God. It's not found in anybody else. Even though you can get lost in that, know that it's not found there and that you are your own person. And since you emulate the peace of God more than anybody else, we need that. I haven't met a single person who doesn't want to feel inner peace. Not a single person. Everyone wants to feel peaceful. And when you're around a really healthy 9 who's in touch with that inner peace, we can all get that from you, and that is a huge gift. 3, acknowledge that you have gifts and abilities, because you do, and we need them, and we want them, and you may as well admit it because the rest of us already know. So admit that you have gifts and abilities. And 4, spirituality can come easier for you. 9s have, I know one 9 in my life, and they say that to have faith in God is just simple. It's almost childlike. Of course I just believe. There are certain people who really wrestle and question their faith more than others, and we need those people as well. But 9s have this way of just being like, yeah, I just trust God. That's it. And especially as a community of faith here, we need those people who have a simple, childlike faith to lean on, especially in those hard moments, because you just get it better than any of us. All right, so even if you're not a 9, you didn't relate to anything that was here, you maybe related to a little bit, we all probably know a 9. I have multiple 9s in my life. They're wonderful people. And as a community on this journey together, we want to best know how to love each other so we can encourage one another in the journey. So I'm going to give everyone who's not a 9 or doesn't think they're a 9 5 ways that we can love a 9 better. You may be thinking of someone in your head who might be a 9. Side note, never label somebody a number, but you can take a guess. But don't ever tell someone their number. That's not fair in the process. But if you think you may know someone, have an idea, these are 5 different ways that we can love them better so they can best live in that best version of themselves. So the first one is to ask them questions and genuinely listen to their answers. They are very used to being brushed to the side. Let's not do that to them. Let's listen to what they want to say. Let's affirm their thoughts and ideas and feelings, and follow their lead on just being with them. They've modeled it so well for us. The least we can do is do it with them as well. Affirm their gifts and abilities, and be very specific when you can, because they often don't believe in themselves or believe that they have gifts and abilities, and they need us to believe in them for them when they're in those moments of uncertainty. Number 3, ask for their perspective. So remember that they can walk in people's shoes and they can understand all points of view very, very well, but they might not necessarily initiate that perspective. So ask for it and understand that they probably do have a perspective that you probably didn't consider. 4, give them some space. 9s often need time alone to process and to dream and to connect with themselves and with God. They're often lovers of nature, not all, but some. So encouraging them to go for a walk outside or be in nature is really, really healthy. So it's said that 9s, their intellect is down in their gut. And it's underneath all these layers of, they've taken on the identity of everybody else, and they've taken on the emotions of everybody else, and there's a lot of external stimulation that's kind of there, and it's layering until their intellect is way down below. And so having time alone and space to just be, they can finally get rid of all of that and just connect with themselves, connect with their dreams, connect with God. And that is, we need them to connect with that so that we can have the best version of themselves. And lastly, encourage them not to live on autopilot or to blindly follow, because they can often just follow other people. Tell them not to. They have their own identity and they have so much to offer the world, and we need that. So the 9s in this room, I'm going to go back to you one more time just to end off. We love you here if you are a 9 or think you are a 9, and I want to end off with this one thing as a encouragement for you. You are deeply receptive, accepting, unself-conscious, and emotionally stable. You are patient, unpretentious, good-natured, and genuinely kind. You are a good listener, reassuring, and a great encourager. Others flourish because you bring peace and harmony wherever you go. So as a 9, 9s reflect God's peace in this world so beautifully, and we need that peace in this community. We need the peace in the neighborhood. We need peace in workplaces and schools and in your homes, and 9s, you do that so well, and we love you for it. All right, let's pray together. God, I just thank you for how you have called us all masterpieces, and that we are all uniquely made, and I just thank you for that. And God, I pray that we wouldn't just brush past those things that you've put inside of us that you want us to take note of, but that we would really see those and take time to wrestle with it and to notice it and to understand it. So I pray that just for each of us, that we would see more of how you created us through this journey. And I thank you for the 9s, the peacemakers, and how you have just put your characteristic of peace so beautifully inside of them. And I pray that you would give those 9s the boldness and the courage to display that peace in this world, God, because we so desperately need and want your peace. And thank you that you have instilled that peace in some people in this world, and that they can be the peace bringers on earth, just like Abraham was, and how you used him. So I just thank you for the journey we're all on, and I just pray that we can Yeah, just know ourselves better, know each other better, and just be united as a community of believers that are created so uniquely, but all created in your image. Amen.